because deconstruction is not a destination, it's a methodology. And the methodology is that you remove all authority except your own.
We are back on the Maven Parent Podcast with our friend Alisa Childers. So last episode, we talked about her book, Another Gospel, and some of her story. So if you didn't catch that episode, make sure and go back and listen to that one so that you can get to know her the way we know her. And we, though, want to talk about her new book. She has another book that's just came out called Live Your Truth and Other Lies. And let me read the subtitle. Exposing popular deceptions that make us anxious, exhausted, and self-obsessed. And that subtitle is, I think, descriptive of how a lot of parents feel right now. Anxious, exhausted, maybe not self-obsessed, but how do we make our kids not self-obsessed?
That's the question. How do we make them not self-obsessed?
Is this book about parenting? No, it's not about parenting, but as Brett and I were talking about having you on and looking through the lies that you tackle in the book, I said to Brett, oh, well, this could be a parenting book. And of course, parents, we think, and grandparents and youth pastors, who's ever listening, this is another book that you need in your armor as you are navigating parenting in this time and place in our culture. So this idea, live your truth, is such a mantra of our culture. So besides it being just a major mantra of the culture, what prompted you in writing this book?
So back in 2017, I had gotten a lot of emails from people wanting me to review a book called Girl Wash Your Face. I don't know if you remember this book. It was really popular. It was like the third best-selling book of the year across all genres, New York Times bestseller.
I read it with a group of guys.
Did you go through it?
Yeah.
I'm sure you did.
Actually, I was going to say a good friend at their women's group at their church read through the book.
Same with me. I had a friend who said that her group had just done a 5 or 6 week study on it at their church. And so I got a lot of emails from people saying, can you please review this book? Because there's something about it that's just, I have red flags. I can't quite discern it. And at first I was like, I'm not going to deal with that. That's like outside my wheelhouse. But then I realized, oh, this is somebody who's claiming to be a Christian. This is actually published on a major Christian publishing platform. It was marketed to Christians. And so that's when it became interesting to me. So anyway, I wrote the post and it went viral. It had like a couple million views within a few weeks of posting it. And I thought, okay, so this is something people are interested in, right? Well, that was when I started getting calls and emails from publishing houses and agents saying, would you write a book? But I wanted to write Another Gospel first because that was my experience. But this book is really an expansion of that blog post, that book review. Because since then, I've seen a lot of the messaging that was in Girl Wash Your Face sort of farm out to other major, pop level influencers on their social media platforms and in books they're writing to Christians about what they say Christianity is about. And it's really, these books really cause you to focus on yourself, put yourself first, view yourself as inherently good, live your true authentic self, live your truth, all of those kind of mantras. And so I thought, well, why not take that one idea and expand it out into a book? And in the meantime, I had been giving talks at women's conferences about some of these slogans. And so just between that blog post and that talk, it sort of bloomed into a book.
Well, this idea of self, I think I love how you start the book and you talk about how so many of the lies, there's a foundation underneath that. And I think that's when we were talking to parents about this book. We talk a lot on the podcast about all this parenting advice and stuff marketed to parents, that as parents, we have to think about the ideas underneath that advice to know if it's good advice. Particularly, how do they view human beings? And do they think human beings are just good? And so our kids are having a bad day, not because maybe they're little sinners and they're struggling with their own sin, but they're good in and of themselves. It's just all this outside stuff, maybe even us, that's their problem. And how do we, empower them? But you talk about in the book, these lies that are underneath this idea of self. Mm-hmm. And I think for Christians, this is key in navigating the lies we're told, but especially our kids are told. So being our authentic self. And this is one of the lies you talk about. To be happy, we have to put ourselves first. And then to be fulfilled, I must be enough for myself. And then the last one you talked about was to be successful, I must control my own destiny. So all these ideas, the starting point is that we identify and really focus on self. So maybe you could elaborate on that a little bit, just how to think about that as we're navigating these lies.
I think that underneath all these lies we believe about ourselves are basically two fundamental ideas. And that's, as you mentioned, that humans are inherently good. I think that's what culture wants us to believe. And that truth is fluid or relative to each person. And if that's true, then you would want to live your truth, because what you find inside of yourself is going to be good. It's going to be right. And it's going to be something worth unleashing on the world, right? It's funny. I remember in maybe high school, maybe early, 20s, Sinead O'Connor had a song. I loved Sinead O'Connor's voice, right? And she had this song.
Does she still have a shaved head?
I don't know. That's a good question. But she had this song that just kept repeating the line, I am enough for myself. I am enough for myself. And I remember being a young woman hearing that and thinking, well, that's really a depressing message. I mean, I just remember thinking, that's so sad if you think that, because I knew how insufficient I was on my own. I knew that I needed something outside of myself to complete me and make me whole. And so I just thought that was some kind of weird rock star message from the, independent, speaking truth to power kind of person. And that's what she thought. But then now we see that this is stitched on pillows. I see this in youth group rooms at churches. This is something that is such a big message, is that if somebody, let's even say somebody's been told lies about themselves, somebody has beat them down and said, you're good for nothing. You'll never be, you'll never amount to anything. And then the thing you want to say is, well, you're enough, right? It sounds good. But I guess in the book, what I'm hoping to get people to do is to think a little bit more deeply about that, because not only is that biblically really problematic, there's a lot of, biblical data we could talk about. But when we say to somebody, you're enough for yourself, essentially what we're doing is putting a burden on them to say, you have to fix all of your own problems all by yourself with only the tools you find inside of yourself. And that's a depressing message if you actually know that what you're going to find inside of yourself is kind of broken. So I think that the idea, like you mentioned, human anthropology, the idea that we are fallen is super, super important to help our kids understand, because there is a whole world of TikTok that is going to be waiting to convince them that that's an abusive doctrine, that it's toxic, that it's the same way abusers approach their victims, beat them down so they'll be dependent on the abuser. This is something I'm seeing so often. And so I think for our kids, especially, to recover the beauty of what it means that Jesus is enough is very important, because it's only abusive if it's not true, right? I mean, think about a person. I give this example. I'll say, imagine there's a guy laying on the ground and somebody walks up to him and just starts beating on his chest, causing deep bruising. Well, that's abusive. I think we would all say that's abuse, right? Unless the person laying on the ground has just had a heart attack and the person beating on their chest is administering CPR. And in that case, it's not abusive. It's actually life-saving because the diagnosis is correct. And so helping our kids understand the diagnosis is a huge way to help insulate them from some of these other lies that sort of build on the back of that one, like, your life is just about being happy, or you're perfect just as you are, you only live once, those kinds of things. Yeah,
and that's where the Christian worldview, also properly understood, the Christian view of human beings properly understood, actually protects us from the abuses as well, because the view isn't, oh yeah, we're miserable sinners, we're worthless. It's, no, we have a fallen human nature that is sinful, that results in our evil. And so morally, we're morally culpable and deserving of punishment. But there's another part of that. And these same creatures are made in God's image. That's right. So we are valuable, intrinsically valuable in and of ourselves. We're valuable because of the kind of thing that we are. So there's this inherent value that doesn't allow you to say, oh, just leave it at this miserable creature. And so just, Christian truth is so valuable in navigating these lies.
Yeah. I love the story you told in the book about when you first became a mom and your daughter was so young, and you talk about so this is where the rub is, because there is some truth in that. God, for example, as mother, and I related to that story, of course, and any mother listening would, because you're overwhelmed with this responsibility that you now have for this human being that you didn't have before. And you feel very ill-equipped. And in a lot of ways we are, but God promises to be with us, give us wisdom, all these things. But there is some truth in that mothers, young mothers, God has equipped your body and you to be a mother. And so there's some of that natural instinct we have, and our bodies are designed to nurture. And so there is that rub in a lot of the lies, and in the Christian worldview, we are made with dignity. Each human being is so valuable.
Yeah.
But we're all also broken. So I love that story because I think it encapsulates a lot of what you're saying, that there's truth in the way we are made is good as human beings, but we have to acknowledge that there's this missing piece, this brokenness about us. And the story of when we're young parents, I think, just is a good example of that.
Yeah, I remember I went to the mall to try to walk my daughter around. She had a birth trauma, so she had a hard time nursing, and because she had, they had to put tubes down her throat when she was just, a minute old. I think there was just some leftover stuff from that made her kind of discontent. Generally speaking, that's putting it very nicely. We've discussed this. She was not happy if she was conscious. Like I tease her. I'm like, if you were awake, you were crying. And so I just couldn't figure out. I couldn't figure out how to make her happy, how to comfort her. And so I remember going to the mall and just thinking, oh, she'll enjoy a walk in the mall. She did not enjoy that at all. No. And I just remember sitting down on the bench. This is the story I tell in the book, where I just sat down on this bench just thinking, is this ever going to feel normal again? And I knew I wasn't enough. And I still do. And I think that's the thing, especially for moms. If we tell ourselves, oh, I'm enough, well, what happens then with all the stuff we miss? Because we all miss stuff. I miss stuff all the time with my kids. And who fills in that gap? Am I going to be responsible for everything I failed to communicate to my kid? And that's where grace is so huge. That's where, you have this almost image of this cup flowing over with no saucer, but it's like God's the saucer catching all of the drips that come out. And knowing that even though we're not going to do this thing perfectly, our kids have God, they have the Holy Spirit. And for me to think that it's just all up to me and I'm enough, all in myself, to me, that's a message that greatly would burden me, to think that if I miss something, then it's all on me.
Yeah, it actually erases grace.
Yeah.
I mean, because if I'm enough and I don't need anything beyond me, I don't need any help because there's nothing wrong with me. And so you actually lose out on grace and redemption and those things. I'm curious. I was just thinking about with reading this book. There's a little different voice in this one than another gospel.
Yeah.
And one thing I really appreciate is a little more of your sarcasm comes out.
I did that for you.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that because I just felt more connected to you, Alisa, and thought, okay, I can hang with her. No, but anyway, that makes it a little. I guess you'd say a fun read. I mean, books are important to read in different ways, but this one is important, but it's also fun because some of your humor gets in there. And just I think that's important because sometimes those of us who do worldview or apologetics and we're critiquing culture, you can get a reputation for being that stodgy, old, grouchy person. And I just want to verify right here, right now, you're not grouchy, Alisa. So
Sometimes
thank you.
I'm grouchy.
Well, it's because you're not
enough. My true authentic self is grouchy.
Yeah. You're not enough.
Or just that books that are bringing a criticism, that are saying, hey, let's look at this and criticize, that it's this grouchy, like everything's bad about the world. And that is definitely not the tone in your book. And I'll just throw in, if you like to listen to books, Alisa actually records this in her voice. So you will get the sarcasm because she's saying it in her voice. So if you like to listen to books, this is a good one. I love when the authors record
too.
their books.
Me too.
Because then they emphasize what they want to emphasize and
I'm sorry.
throw the jokes in when
I'm
they
sorry.
can.
You,
so
you
next
can't
time,
let go of this.
Next
can you?
time you need to record
I
the
feel like
audio.
there's some sort of a
Oh, there's always some sort
Something.
of something.
Well, I do
underneath.
like audiobooks, and so I'm always listening for voices, but I wish Brett and John would have done it would have been better. No offense to the guy who I don't actually know who it is. Okay, anyway, I'm
No, it's okay.
I'm criticizing someone I don't mean to, but I love to listen to audio. So listener, if you like to listen things in the car, get Alisa's book on the audio and listen to it. But anyway, you were going somewhere else. I
I have
throwing
no
that in.
idea where I was going, but
he's so hurt right now.
I'm wounded.
wounded
But
and
that's
he's
okay.
recovering.
We meet with our counselor after every podcast recording, and so it's okay. We'll work at that. In
So
counseling.
the emphasis that you distinguish in the book living your truth as opposed to the truth. And with Christians, obviously we should have this high value of truth. And this is why we're going to do a whole podcast, probably several, on lying, dealing with lying with your kids. And this is a normal thing that all parents have to deal with, because we all, when we're little, start to navigate this world of, oh, can I say what isn't true and it be okay? Can I get away with this thing? But as Christians, we do have to value truth above how we feel, above even our own perception of things. Our perception might be wrong. So maybe talk about the distinction you make about our truth and the truth that you talk about in the book.
It is interesting, isn't it, that kids just kind of know how to lie. It's almost as if they're not enough all by themselves, and you actually have to teach them to not lie. Just saying. So my truth versus the truth. I think, most people I don't think walk around as relativists in every area, right? People go to the bank, they expect their money to be there. They stop at stoplights. There's ways that most people will admit that there's some objective truths about the world. But I think because our culture has moved religion and morality into the opinion category and not in the red light mathematics and banking category, then I think that these lies kind of all build on themselves. If you think that you're inherently good, if that's your worldview, if that's what you think about yourself, and if you don't feel that way, then it's your mind that needs to be corrected, not something inside you, then it would seem virtuous to do introspection, do some serious self-evaluation, dig down inside your heart, identify what your deepest longings and desires are, and then live those out and live your truth, right? That would make sense if truth was fluid, if truth wasn't fixed in those areas, and what you were going to find inside yourself was inherently good. I mean, I get why that would be sounding like a good thing to do. But the problem is that what you find, what those deepest desires that you're going to locate inside of yourself a lot of them are probably going to contradict what's actually morally good. And so that's where Christianity and this whole live your truth culture are just totally at odds, because Christianity would say there's something in you that actually needs to change. Like there's something you need to turn from, repent from, surrender to Christ, let him do the work of regeneration inside of you to make you more like him. Whereas the world would say, whatever you find down there, that's your contribution to the world. You need to live that out. And that's part of being authentic, is living those desires out. And I can see why that's so persuasive to people, but it only works if we're not inherently sinful, because you can do all the soul searching you want and you're still going to find a sinner down there that needs a savior. And then you will have spent all this time trying to find that sinner, and you could have just spent reading your Bible.
That's why the memes and the books and the pillow slogans eventually leave us empty.
Yeah.
And needing a new pillow slogan or another self-help book.
Are they really called pillow slogans?
Well,
I like it. I think we should
I
start
didn't know
that.
that. I'm going to start using that.
You know what's on pillows, or it's especially marketed to women. So Elisa knows exactly what I'm
decorative
talking
pillows.
Okay.
But
I
coffee
guarantee
mugs,
you can
all
go
the
on
things.
Google right now and find an I'm Enough decorative pillow. 100%.
Oh, yeah.
Guarantee you.
I'm gonna buy that for you for Christmas.
Or like the slogan. Oh my gosh, the slogans on T-shirts.
Oh, yeah.
Especially marketed to little
Girls, girl power,
all of that.
Yeah.
But it eventually leaves us empty. So we need another Girl Wash Your Face book or whatever it is. We have to go to another seminar to get pumped up because the philosophy is empty, and it's actually contrary to reality. And so then we bump up against it. Oh, this isn't working. And instead of, like you said, we don't want to surrender our will. I don't want to do it. No one wants to. And so we would rather have a mug slogan that could help us feel like, you know what, I'm okay as a mom. I'm doing okay, or I'm doing the best I can, kind of thing. But eventually those pats on the back, that's all it is. It's a little pat. And then now the next week, like you said, as parents, we know we are not equipped to handle everything that life's going to throw at us as parents, that we can't possibly be the perfect parents. And so we get to that place, and now where do we go?
Yeah, and these lies, I mean, this is serious stuff, because you think about absorbing that lie over time ends up being an obstacle to the gospel, because, you know, the first step in the gospel is the recognition of this really bad news, that we're sinners, that we're broken, that we're not enough, all of that. And so untangling our kids from these lies is so vital. In fact, I'm just trying to think as a parent, like practically, what do you do? Well, number one, you get yourself educated and equipped, because that will help you to start see this stuff. It'll help you to begin noticing this stuff. And I think that's the first step for parents. And that's why I think your book can be such a helpful tool. It'll help parents to notice. And then what you do with your kid is you help your kids notice. So you mentioned, all the girl power stuff. So, okay, you take your kids with you in Target, you're walking down the aisle and you see the display and it says on the t-shirt, I'm enough, or whatever. That's when you pause with your kid and you point it out to them.
Yeah.
And you know, the first step is you want them to notice those things. You want it to get to the point where they're grabbing you and saying, Mom, you know, look at this shirt. Look what that shirt says.
Yeah.
And so, but that starts often with us first pointing it out to them. And so knowing what the lies are is the first step, so that you can then begin highlighting those for the kids around you.
Can I add to that? Because this is something I think
you can't. It was so great. It was, of course.
It's perfect.
No, you're the author.
No, this is good, because I think the two of you model this really well, but it's not even only pointing it out, but it's how you are interacting with it that I think is so important for the kids, for them to see you not rattled by it, not reacting with fear or anger or shutting down, but just, hey, look at this. You know, that's interesting that they're trying to make you believe that. And then your kids see that you're not rattled by it. I think that's something I really did see in my parents too, growing up, is that when they were interacting with things they disagreed with, it was just like, well, I disagree with this. I was reading the scripture where it said this. And it's not like they were canceling the pastor who had preached it or didn't respect him or didn't continue to go to the church, but it was just, it really taught me to think for myself without feeling like I was getting sucked into this cultic groupthink, right? It's like, you're not rattled by it. You're just like, hey, I'm just pointing this out. Look what this t-shirt is trying to get you to believe. Look at all these, different messages. Even now we're seeing in places like Target and Walmart. Well, not so much Walmart. I saw it at Target though, where they're having like boys model the girls' clothes and girls model the boys' clothes. And even just pointing that out, like that, they're wanting you to believe something about the world by doing that.
Yeah. And
pointing it out.
It's not ridicule.
Right.
Because that's the temptation. Sometimes you're overwhelmed by the amount of madness out there.
Yeah.
You just want to, that is so dumb,
Yeah.
But if we can be self-controlled and model that for our kids as we engage with the world, then we can model truth and a grace at the same time that's really attractive. And also we want to get our kids we want to get them to think critically about this stuff. So when you notice it, it's like, okay, now what do you see there? What's the message?
Yeah.
Okay, what's wrong with that message? Do you think there's anything wrong?
And I think asking them too, like asking them to even point out the strongest point of that argument to keep them from just blowing it off, so that when they get older and they say, oh, we just blew it off. No, because I'll have my kids, my daughter watch debates between a Christian and atheist. And I said, I want you to tell me the strongest point the atheist made. We're not going to just blow it off as dumb. Like what is the strongest point he made? And then what's the answer to that? Yeah. And I think just modeling that stuff is important.
Yeah. Well, I think about when I get when I have the hardest time not getting upset and just reacting, but being able to stay calm. For me is when I maybe haven't figured out and really dug into that issue as much as I probably need to.
Oh, that's good.
And so we get defensive. And our defensiveness may be good, and probably it is, but most likely it's because we don't know what to say or how to respond. It's like, that's bothering me and it's upsetting to me, but I don't know what to say to it. So then it's just like, oh, that is so stupid, or that is so dumb. And you just get angry, and your kids will be like, why is mom so angry? But it's typically that we can sit down and, like you talked about your parents having conversations. Oh, I understand what you're saying about this verse or this scripture, but actually, as I've looked at it, you can stay calm when you understand the lie, the truth. Yeah. You've looked at it, and so you're not afraid of it, and you're not necessarily afraid your kid's going to be captured by it. So you have the patience to say to them, okay, do you see that there? So what is that saying about boys? Or what is that saying about girls? Or what is that saying about whatever? And you can walk through it with them patiently, and you can model that if you've done some of the work. And this is why we push books and learning on this podcast, because you do have to do the work that it takes to think about what messages are coming at us, and then how to think about it in a Christian way, which is why I love that your book takes us through many lies of the culture, and then how to think through it in a way that after you read a chapter, you feel equipped to, oh yeah, so that's the lie, and this is how to think through it in a really good way. So maybe should we go through, or are we?
Well, we're
too short on time.
Well, yeah, we're running short on time.
Can we?
I think
about one lie of the book.
Well,
you want to go to that?
I want to hit this one.
Okay.
Because I think what you were saying there is really important about, I mean, the evangelical church by and large is shallow. We don't really know our stuff. And so then we end up coming across as really defensive and not winsome and engaging. So I think that's why we need to be constantly reading books, constantly reading Alisa Childers books.
And repenting to our kids too, because even when you do overreact, one of the best things you can do. Right. I did this last night. I've been traveling constantly. I was physically exhausted. I was watching something with my daughter, and I kind of reacted, and she's like, Mom, and I said, you know what, I'm so sorry. Let me explain to you what's going on right now. I'm physically exhausted, and I've just been sharing the gospel and truth with a whole lot of people, and just to like watch this darkness and these lies, it's just, for my soul, it's hard right now. I just don't have the bandwidth to engage with it. But that's really what's going on. And I'm sorry, I shouldn't have reacted that way. I think that models like real people. We're real people. We do that sometimes, you know.
Yeah,
that's right.
Sure.
You should repent more, honey.
You should, oh my God.
And so the kids heard it right here. They're gonna remind you.
Do you want to take a poll with our kids?
No, moving on. Moving on. Okay, one thing you say in the book, which and it fits in with dealing with these issues related to truth. But you talk about deconstruction as postmodernism's love child.
It is.
Unpack that for us, because I think
deconstruction.
This is not a popular view. Yeah. I don't know if you know this, but a lot of people disagree with me. A lot of people, even in apologetics, and they will say, no, deconstruction can be healthy. It can be just a way of rethinking your faith. And I'm just telling you, I've spent a year researching deconstruction, because that's what my next book is on. And deconstruction, as it is manifesting in culture, what most people mean, other than evangelicals trying to baptize the word, it means deconversion from the biblical authority for sure, and from core historic doctrines of the Christian faith. That's what it is. And it's very postmodern, because deconstruction is not a destination. It's a methodology. And the methodology is that you remove all authority except your own. And then you assess claims based on what you believe is helpful or harmful, oppressive or liberating, traumatic or healing. And you determine what you think is true based on that, on your own authority, not on objective truth or reasoning to biblical authority or anything like that. It's not what it's about. In fact, in the deconstruction movement, if you say, oh, I deconstructed, but I'm still an evangelical Christian, they will tell you immediately, then you didn't deconstruct. And that's because it's just not what the word means. It's very postmodern. It traces back to philosophers from the 60s, Jacques Derrida, who was considered by many to be the father of deconstruction. Now, for him, he was just talking about words and how that might apply to words. And he didn't believe, now, but get this, for Christianity, he didn't believe that objective meaning could be communicated with words. He didn't think words could have singular definitions. And so for him, the interpretation of what was being communicated with words, the person hearing or reading the words had just as much authority for the meaning than the intent of the author. Well, that's exactly where we're at today. And so it's very self-authoritative. This is the world I'm in right now, so I get a little bit fired up about it. But, and I get, there are a lot of Christians out there, especially younger Christians, who will say, well, I'm in deconstruction. And that's because they've heard that it can be this healthy process. But man, I hope to persuade parents and pastors, encourage kids, yes, engage their doubts, ask the hard questions, make sure their faith is their own, rethink everything, take it apart, dismantle it like a car and put it back together as many times as you need to. But let's use biblical language for that. Discernment, restoration of your, of truth, following the way. But let's not borrow a postmodern word that is dominantly expressing itself in culture as deconversion. It's not wise, I don't think.
Yeah, you'll hear people use it sometimes just that they grew up in this kind of church and now because of their study of theology, they're changing their views on some of what
eschatology or even
exactly.
It's like it means everything from what, changing your mind on what you want to have for lunch to converting to atheism. It's literally, and that's what's so funny about that though, is that's very postmodern to say we can use this word in all these different kinds of ways and it can mean that to you and it can mean that's Derrida's playbook right there. That's actually tipping your hat to postmodernism if you're going to agree that you can define it in that many different kinds of ways.
Yeah. And so many people who have walked down that road of deconstruction, end up with the deconversion. So it doesn't make sense to me why Christians want to try and salvage that term and continue to hold on to it and utilize it. And so I think you're right. This is a really important distinction. When someone says they're deconstructing, first question to ask them is, okay, what do you mean? What do you mean?
Yeah,
right? What do you
sure.
mean by it? What is deconstruction? And is it merely doubt? Are you struggling with some doubts? Or is it something beyond that? And so that's, if a kid brings that up to you, really get clear.
It's important
on what
to clarify. In another gospel, I actually describe my faith crisis as a deconstruction, but I've actually abandoned that now. I don't use, it was the best word I had at the time, but I don't use it anymore. When people ask my story, I don't actually say anymore, I went through deconstruction, because I always wanted to know what was true. I came to the edge of agnosticism, but it was based on wanting to know what was true about objective reality, not just some self-authoritative process of finding the beliefs that work for me.
Yeah. Well, there are so many ideas that we as families have to navigate. And we just wanted to make sure everyone is aware of your work, Alisa. You're doing really important work, I think, at this point in this cultural moment, and the things that you're addressing are so vital. And so everyone who's listened to this now has an obligation to go buy both of your books. Get her newest book, Live Your Truth and Other Lies. This is a really good tool to help your kids navigate this cultural moment. And we always need to keep in mind why ideas, even in our parenting, because a lot of parents just want that practical step. And we constantly hammer home here on the Maven Parent Podcast, you have to think carefully and think biblically and bring a Christian worldview to bear on all of your parenting for a number of reasons. But one of them is for the transformation of ourselves and our kids. Paul talks about it in Romans 12 too. Don't be conformed to the patterns of this world, but be transformed. And the thing he elevates is the renewing of the mind. And that's why your books are so vital, because they can help renew our minds with truth so that our young people aren't caught without the tools they need to navigate this cultural moment.
I'm going to plug one more resource, and that's Alisa. Of course, you have a podcast, the Alisa Childers podcast, and I love listening to the podcast. I usually do a long walk either Saturday morning or Sunday morning. Your podcast comes out on Sundays, so a lot of times my long Sunday morning walk, I'll listen to your podcast. But it's a wonderful resource to the church. You cover all kinds of topics, but really this book is a lot of what your podcast is about, and talking about orthodoxy, the lies that are out there. And so that's another, if you don't already listen to it, get that on your regular feed, the Alisa Childers podcast. So anyway, thank you for being on our podcast. Thank you for the work you're doing. And in the church, you are a valuable member of God's church, of course, just for who you are, but as a teacher and a writer, and the passions that God has given you, you've been an asset in our home, and I know in many homes. So thank you for your work.
Oh, I feel the same way about you guys. So it's great to be together always.
Maven exists to help the next generation know truth, pursue goodness, and create beauty for the cause of Christ. To find out more, check out maventruth.com.